Hi everyone, I'm Tom Wild from ProWritingAid. Thank you for joining us for another session in the ProWritingAid Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest, as always for these sessions, is Sally OJ, our resident book doctor. How are you doing, Sally?
Doing very well on this lovely evening, an unexpectedly beautiful evening here in Brighton.
It is, isn't it? Really nice. A bit of autumn sunshine. Sally, tonight we're talking about pacing and structure. So let's dive straight in, and I want to ask just how important is pacing in fiction writing?
It's absolutely crucial. If you don't have pacing, you're going to lose your reader's interest straight away. So I think most people who are here with us this evening, this morning, this afternoon, wherever people are in the world, will have done their homework and will know this, that pacing is absolutely vital. And one of the things really, I think we're going to sort of revise a little bit the sort of general rules of pacing, but one of the things I think that I find a lot with the authors that I write with, they have completely understood the premise of pacing throughout a story. They've got that, they know about book structure and how to keep that up. But what often gets lost is how to keep the pacing going in a much smaller way.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to talk about that a bit this evening, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I've noticed you there kind of making the symbol of this kind of shape of, you know, I think you're referring to what we call Freytag's pyramid or triangle, a guide to, you know, everybody, a guide to storytelling structure. I'm interested to know actually if any of our listeners tonight hasn't come across Freytag's pyramid or structure, just put a note in the chat. But should we have a look at that first and you can talk us through it?
Let's do that.
Okay, bear with me. So yeah, so we've got a couple of people saying that they've not come across it before. Here we go. So hopefully you can see my shared screen,
yeah,
and just see the 5 points of the Freytag's pyramid there.
So what you have, this is your basic storytelling structure, and you'll find this with nearly every book you've ever read, nearly every film you've ever seen. It's the storytelling, the accepted storytelling structure. So you've got exposition, which is basically setting the story, introducing us to all the characters, the world where the story takes place. Then you've got what they call the conflict or rising action, which is the part of the story, you know, where the inciting incident happens, where the protagonist, the main character, meets various problems that thwart him or her in attaining their goal. Then you've got the climax, which always surprises people. It comes at the top of the pyramid because they think the climax is at the end. But that's a bit part of the story where the big action tends to happen and various plot points often come together. Then you've got the falling action or the anticlimax, where the results of the climax sort of play themselves out. Often at this point, things look very bad for our hero or our heroine. And then you've got the resolution or denouement, when all the loose ends of the story come together, the problems tend to be resolved or explained, and there's this sense of completion for the reader. And a very good example, Tom, as we were talking about this before, one that I could pick 100 different novels, but a really easy one that most people are familiar with is The Hobbit. So that's a perfect example of of that structure, and also a perfect example, as we will discuss later, of how he keeps the pacing going really crisply throughout, even when the big action isn't happening. And this is what people tend to forget. Even when the big action isn't happening, the pacing is still ticking along, and you've still got what I like to call page turnability.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to stop that share now so I can bring the screen back. Okay, that, and please, I can post that out, or you can find that just by looking up Freytag's pyramid in any search engine. But Sal, where is it that people tend to, particularly new writers, tend to go wrong then? You've mentioned that point about, you know, not really thinking it applies to the whole story, but it's also on a chapter and page by page basis too. Is there anything else?
Well, it is essentially that. Most people, when they start to learn to write, when they start to study their craft, get the sense that they've got to keep the pacing going through the book. They recognize that, and most people do that. But I find very often working with my authors that it's easy to forget that even in the quiet moments of the story, even when there isn't a battle or a, you know, my mind's gone blank, 1,000 different books examples, you've got to still keep the pacing ticking along, because if it gets soggy, if the pacing sags, your reader gets bored, and you do not want your reader to get bored. So what you have to remember, it's not just in terms of the whole book, it's in terms of each chapter. Each chapter needs its own story arc, really, and the pacing to keep this. It can come down to each page. Sometimes it can even come down to paragraphs, because as soon as you've lost your reader's attention, it's very difficult to get it back. And to talk about paragraphs is a bit melodramatic. You know, usually if you've lost someone for a paragraph, you are going to get them back. But if you do it often, if every few pages you've got a paragraph or two where the pacing just drops, that sends a strong subconscious message. So, yeah, sorry.
So I was going to say, I guess one of the things I find really interesting is that, you know, if you get it right, it's not just the psychological impact of pacing. It's the pacing that drives someone to, you know, to keep the page turnability, like you say, right? And so they're just thinking, oh, just one more page, one more chapter before I turn the page off, and turn the light off, and they're hooked. But there's also the physiological side, isn't it, where your pace is what's releasing adrenaline for your reader if you're getting it right.
And I use this phrase, keep people racing through the story, or keep people chasing you through the story, and you know, those words are chosen carefully. Racing, chasing, that sense of adrenaline, that sense of, you know, oh, I've just one more page. That is very much down to pacing, and so it's something you've really got to keep your eye on through the book. And you know, we were talking about Freitags just now, and people who hadn't heard of Freitags might have heard, you know, the typical story arc is often described as boy gets girl, boy wants girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. You know, that is absolutely classic. And when I was talking to you, I was talking about the film The Piano, which is a long time ago now, but even that is girl wants piano, girl loses piano, girl gets piano, girl loses piano, girl gets piano back again. You know, that any story you can think sort of fits into that. The protagonist wants something, the protagonist is thwarted, the protagonist overcomes adversity and achieves their goal. So that is how pacing and structure sort of mesh together. But the big bits, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again, those are easy-ish. It's keeping the pacing going in the bits where he's sitting around in his hut thinking, oh, I've lost her, I'm never going to get her back again.
Yeah, and
hard.
And particularly hard at, you know, as the author, because you're so close to the story, you're so in kind of emotionally attached to it. So what are the questions you ask yourself to kind of put yourself in the reader's shoes, if you like?
So there's, again, going back, you know, I've worked with an awful lot of authors over the years. And what I tend to find, or no, what I always find is, and all your authors here will know that this is true, I think, if you're reading your own work, there's always a bit where you think there's something in the back of your head saying this isn't quite working. And the way I often describe it is, you know, if you've got a beautiful crystal glass and you ting it with your finger, it makes that beautiful chiming sound. And that's when you know something. Right? But sometimes you read your own work and it does this. And that's your inner voice telling you this isn't quite right yet. So in those places, what you've got to think about might be something like, what do you want to tell the audience, the reader, at this point? What are you telling them with each scene, with each chapter, sometimes with each page? What's the point you want to get across? What's the message you want to get across? Is it being done in the most effective way? And often the thing that really drags pacing down is extra padding, extra extra padding. Now it's, you know, description is brilliant and you must have it, but it you know, sometimes, for instance, in a fantasy book, we're talking about The Hobbit, you can chuck a lot of wacky characters in there that we never see again, so you must be sort of quite assertive about not having too many extra people, not having too many extra interesting things. And if we talk about The Hobbit, people might be outraged, you might see all sorts of things coming up now in the comments, but for me, the only place in The Hobbit, which I haven't read for a very long time, where the pacing sags badly is where Tom Bombadil appears. And that, I really think that's you're just taking down a complete cul-de-sac there. It doesn't really add to the story at all. It doesn't really keep things moving, and you just think, oh, come on, let's just get back to the action now. Let's just keep things moving.
Yeah.
If you've got Bombadil fans out there, I do apologise, but
well, no, in fact, quite the opposite. In fact, Shanda has said you're absolutely right about Tom Bombadil. Yeah. So, and although yes,
but it is my point remains that he's an energy sapper.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, one of the things, so you mentioned to me before about introducing new characters we won't see again, or if there's a long conversation with them. So it's it's being able to put yourself in the reader's shoes and look at that and think, well, actually, I don't see where that fits. So immediately, my interest is waning. So while we're talking about this, this is brilliant. Shunda's actually said she's always felt that way and was afraid to tell people. Sacrilege. Critique The Hobbit, you know, but we're not criticizing it. It is a wonderful example, but you know, it's always good to use real examples.
Somebody's out that it's Lord of the Rings, which I think is actually true, but my point remains that he sucks all the energy out of the book at that point.
But we're not panning it. We're big fans. We are big fans. So I'm going to dive straight in with a question, because Cheryl has posted one just to say, is it better to change chapter lengths or have all a similar length? So some chapters have, say, 1,000 words, others have 2,500 words. Do you have different scenes in one chapter, or better to just make a short chapter of a particular scene?
This is the kind of thing that I know there's a lot of advice about this. But I urge people not to get too hung up on stuff like this. Chapters find their natural end, and if you flick through most of your favourite books, you'll see there's a basic chapter length that we all sort of accept as being about right. Some books have got lots of average length chapters, and they'll suddenly have one that's just one page. It stands out, it's a scene, it's a moment. They've just given that one page to the chapter. Some chapters go on for a very long time because the scene is very exciting, they don't want to cut it in half. So just use your instincts. Honestly, chapter length is there to serve you. But don't use rules to stop the flow of your book. So chapters are there to help serve your story. And you can do what the heck you like with them, basically. And
in fact, I mean, they are, along with sentence length, paragraph length, they are great tools for controlling pacing, right?
They are, and you talk about sentence length, and that can be a real problem with pacing. If you run out of breath when you're reading a sentence, and there's too many sentences like that on a page, that's going to affect the pacing. So that's why I said even down to sentences. So the occasional long sentence is fine, of course. So better to try and keep an eye on it, to be honest. You know, every one of these things that we do, every one of these Ask the Book Doctors, I say, read your book out loud to yourself. I'm never going to give any better advice in all of these sessions. Read your book out loud to yourself, either as you write each chapter, read it back to yourself aloud If there's somebody who loves you more than life itself, you can ask them to read it back to you, but it's a big ask. Or read the whole thing back to yourself when it's finished, and you will be amazed. Everything we're talking about in these sessions will crop up, and you will see them, you will hear them. And if you can't read a sentence aloud without having to stop and take a big breath, that sentence is too long.
Yeah.
To cut it in half.
Great. I should add at this point, I think it's a neat segue into the ProWritingAid pacing report. So it's one of the reports that we offer within ProWritingAid, and that finds areas in your writing that are paced more slowly. So it looks at where you've got clusters of long sentences together, and it will identify where you've got too many slower paced paragraphs in a row, and where your reader's attention is going to wane. So it's definitely worth running it through the pacing report. Sorry, Sally, you were saying?
Yes, sorry, I interrupted you. Somebody here has said, even better, use a text-to-language tool so you'll catch errors. People do that, but you don't get the nuance. And when you read to yourself, you can see if the nuance is you can suddenly think, oh, I should have put, actually that does need an exclamation mark, or actually that sounds very flat. Look out, he said, is not the same as watch out, he cried. So you can hear that nuance. Text to language, people do it. I don't think it's nearly as effective. It's better than nothing. But you and it doesn't stumble. And what you want is to see where people stumble or where you stumble yourself. And that's actually crucial things.
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, actually, it's another good reason to have a good beta reader or two.
And this, I'm sorry, I can't see your name, but you're making excellent points, saying reading to yourself, you can gloss over areas subconscious. That's absolutely true, which is why I said, if there's somebody who loves you enough to read your book to you, that's the absolutely perfect way of doing it. But even if you read it yourself, even though you basically know your book off by heart, I'm telling you, all the, if you've seen my website, you've seen some of the people I work with, they all do it. They all do it, and it's a secret weapon for writers. It's a thing to do.
So Joan has asked, what about an inciting incident to start a book rather than exposition to get reader into the work?
You always need your inciting incident. Does everyone know what the inciting incident is?
I don't, so can you tell me?
It's when Gandalf arrives.
Okay.
But before Gandalf has arrived at Bilbo's door, we have got a very good sense of Bilbo's life. We know he's got a very comfortable life. We know he likes to eat a lot. We know he lives in the Shire, which is this very peaceful place. We've got a very good sense of him and of his world. So you have to have that. Of course there are exceptions to all these rules. Of course there are. So, if you want to, the trouble is if you start your book with a bang, literally or figuratively, you've got to keep that up. You've got to keep that pacing up. If you start your book with a bang and then say, and Bilbo was a hobbit who lived in the Shire, suddenly your reader's like, oh, okay, it's all gone flat. So if you start with a big bang, you've got to keep that up right from the beginning. And of course it can work. Of course you can do it. But again, I always urge people, look at your favorite book. You'll see, even if it's only a page or two, they set the scene.
Yeah.
They set the scene, and then they lead you into the story. And sometimes for a chapter or two. Sometimes for a page or two, sometimes for a chapter or two.
Sally, you mentioned people looking at your site. Can you just remind us of the address so we can put it in chat for people?
SallyOJ.com.
Okay, so I'm just putting that there for people who want to have a look. Okay, and Sal, I just want to take you back. Sorry, go on, you're about to say something.
Sorry, I should stop looking at these. I won't do it anymore, Tom. I'll turn it off. But asking the question about James Bond, absolutely. There's always an exception to the rule. There really is. I'm going to turn off so I can't see chat anymore because it's distracting me. That is specifically, James Bond is basically action with some story included. You know, the people don't watch James Bond for the story. You know, they watch James Bond for the action, for the gadgets, for the cars, for the girls. You know, that's what they watch it for. And if there's a story as well, hey, that's great. So you've got to think of your audience, got to think of who your reader is.
I'm smiling, Sal, because I think we've been rumbled. I think our audience have realised that you get distracted if any questions go into the chat box rather than Q&A, and you can't help yourself to answer them. So, but there we go, Brad. There's your answer. So someone's just asked, would you suggest the same principles to a non-fiction biography? So, you know, same principles with non-fiction.
Biographies, in fact, Tom and I were talking about this. Yes. Basically, you've got to keep, you know, I've worked on 2 extremely successful biographies, award-winning successful biographies. They weren't linear. She went all over the place. She didn't say I was born in a little house in North London and I had, you know, she in fact, the beginning of one of the biographies is one of the most outrageous first pages in any book. But it comes back, whatever the book is that you're writing, think of your reader. Think of your reader and think of the story you want to tell them and the best way to tell them that. And with biography or autobiography, sometimes you don't want to be linear. Sometimes you want to choose, you know, exactly actually what your other author was asking. You want to choose a big moment in their life and then go backwards. What happened? But it's the same. The rule about pacing is true. A biography is full of really boring stuff. And if you cut out the boring stuff, there's no book. So you have to find ways to keep that, make that boring stuff not boring, to show how it feeds the character of the person, to show how it moved her or his life along. That's what you have to do. You have to focus on keeping your reader hooked and the page turnability.
Yeah. I want to just pick up on that, Sal, because something you've talked about before is having trust in your reader that they will get something.
Yeah.
So kind of trying to limit this tendency to over-explain or over-reiterate because you want them to get it, but they will have got it. Is that right?
This is something that really, thank you, Tom, because this is really crucial. This is something that's going to kill your pacing stone dead is repetition. Either repetition in a sentence where you say, you know, Michael said, hello, Michael wasn't expecting to see him today, but Michael was really glad to see him. You know, that'll kill your pacing stone dead. And this is another thing that reading out loud. But repetition of sentiment will absolutely, you know, if the reader's thinking, you've already said this, I've already read this scene. I mean, it was a different scene, but basically it's the same scene. That is going to absolutely slaughter your pacing with big knives, in a horrible way. Not in an exciting way.
So I really like this question from Alison because I just think this demonstrates a lot of the things we see from not just new writers, anyone venturing into this world. So Alison says, I have beta readers, who tell me to vary the pacing in my writing. Others say to keep all my sentences short and sweet. What are your thoughts about this?
Vary it. Most of all, I mean, you know, we all need a reader. It's vital. And the best fallback, to be honest, is keep things short. But what tends to happen if you've got a lot of short sentences is that they become very declarative. He did this, he said that, this happened, then that happened. He said, oh no, it happened. So if you're keeping your sentences, you know, everyone's heard of KISS. keep it short and simple, or keep it simple, stupid, however, which way you want to do it. There is huge truth in that. But if you do that, you've got to make sure that the writing is literary. You're not business writing, this is fiction writing. So you don't want a bunch of declarative sentences, all one after the other, or loads of things that just says he, she, she. So you've got to be very mindful, if you do that, to keep the writing interesting, and that you're writing prose, basically, when you're writing fiction. No, not literally, but you know, you're not writing a business journal, you're not writing an instruction manual. You want people to say, oh, this is beautiful writing, or this is this writing is so good that it's invisible.
Yes.
And it's not going to be that. If it's saying he, it's not going to be invisible.
So definitely vary. Okay. We're building up a few questions now, so I'm just going to go through a couple of these, Sally. What Eileen asks, when should characters of a subplot start their own story? I'm not sure if that's...
Excellent question. And one that I'm completely incapable of answering. Subplots are fantastic to help pacing. If something starts to go a bit soggy in your main story, you kick in your subplot and immediately the pacing shoots back up again. You've got to do, and this is one of the things, of course, with pacing generally, you've got to do your planning. I know not everyone likes to do it, but you've really got to. And there are 100 different ways. And if you go online, you'll find all these different guides to how to structure your book, and they all work. You'll find the one that's perfect for you. One of my authors does the post-its all over the wall bit. Another one has got spreadsheets. People use all different ways of doing it. But you have you basically need to know what's going to happen in each chapter. Ideally, you need to know that before you start writing the book. And if you've got that happening, you can, you're the master of your own fate. You can change it around. You can look at that thing and think, oh no, that, George shouldn't die there. That's ridiculous. I'm going to have him die 2 chapters later, or whatever. So if you've got your chapter plan, which I really urge you to do, then you will see when your subplot should kick in. And remember, nothing's carved in stone.
Yeah.
Imagine when people had to write their books out with pen and ink and couldn't just cut and paste things. Nothing is carved in stone. You can change anything. But with subplot is an excellent, I do have a note actually to mention it, but you beat me to it, is an excellent way to save pacing. And don't, I was going to say don't kick it in too soon, but it depends. Depends on the book, depends on the genre. It depends on a lot of things. But you make a plan and it'll all become clear.
Okay. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Another that's a question we're commonly asked is, what about passive sentences? I use ProWritingAid and they always tell me I have passive sentences.
Yeah. That is another thing which will make the pacing very soggy. Because if you use a passive voice, there's nothing literally wrong with using the passive voice, but it's just got it again. It leaks energy. If you use an active sentence, it's crunchy, it's snappy, it's got energy in it. If you use a passive sentence, it's sort of sits there. It sits there on the page. Now, of course, you can do it sometimes. Everything you can do sometimes. But as a rule, you want to stick to the active voice as much as you can, because it does drive the energy and maintain the energy. And that's true across the board. If you're even doing business writing, that's true. Absolutely.
And it's something that we commonly is frequently asked by our users of ProWritingAid. And I think I always make the point that, just like you've said, Sal, there's nothing wrong with it, but people tend to overuse it. And in fact, we have what's called a passive index. So we're trying to say, well, actually, you should just be trying to increase the proportion of active voice that you're using as opposed to passive.
Well, the other thing it does, Tom, is it helps the reader trust you. It helps your reader feel that you know what you're doing, because subconsciously, if you're writing mostly in the passive voice, your reader will lose a bit of confidence in you, and there's no rational way to explain that. They just will. They want to feel that you're in control. They want to feel you're driving them through the book.
Yeah, that's right. And Martin, linked to your question, so you've just asked, could you use passive sentences consciously in the hope of strengthening the punch of the active sentence? Well, of course you can use it consciously, and there are times when you want to use it for very good reason. But I think that's the point, is that you need to keep a watch on it. We tend to overuse it. Yeah,
and if you're doing that, it's got to be, I mean, you sound like somebody, was it Martin, did you say?
Yeah, Martin.
Who's, got a clear idea of what he wants to do. If it's done well, that's going to work very well. And, you can have a character who always speaks in the passive voice. That can show a lot about that person.
Yeah.
But it's got to be done well. If you're going to use devices like that, they must work.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's move on with a couple more questions. So Marv asks, for a non-fiction book, are character, plot, theme still the three ingredients a writer needs to address?
No, but for a non-fiction, well, yes. Yes and no. Not exactly that necessarily, but that Freytag's pyramid structure is something you still need to follow.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be, boy wants girl, boy loses girl, but it has to be, man wants to build steam engine, man is thwarted, man finally builds steam engine blows up, steam engine is a tremendous success. As a general rule, and of course there's 1,000 books that go against it, and James Joyce springs instantly to mind, but there are plenty of others. As a general rule, you cannot go wrong with Freytag's pyramid if you stick to that structure for whatever book you're writing.
Yeah,
you can go wrong. You can go wrong spectacularly, but it's a damn good structure.
Amelia asks an interesting question. So she said, and I find this interesting. I've been reading around kind of the idea of pacing or how to use pacing and structure, and she's picked up on something that I've read about, which is how important is having a time or deadline looming in the plot for pacing.
Fantastic, absolutely great. Unless you overuse it, you can't have people saying every. I mean, we're going to do a session on tension and conflict, and tension, of course, is one of the things that really keeps pacing, going along. So, having a secret, people having a secret, somebody knowing something that somebody else doesn't know, there being a time deadline. These are all fantastic things. What you can't have is somebody on every page saying, "We've only got 24 hours. We've only got 23 hours." So then it's just like, who cares? You have to manage that like all tools. You have to manage it well. You have to use it well. But yes, a time in position is a great way. Yeah.
A ticking clock. Right. Yeah. So Johan asks, what about using prologues? Does this affect pacing?
Prologues can be great, and prologues can deal with the setting the scene or the big bang or whatever. The only trouble with the prologue is you've got to be terribly careful not to give the game away. You've got to structure your prologue really carefully, because I've worked on several books quite recently with beautiful prologues, absolutely beautiful, and every single one of them I might not have read the rest of the book, because everything is once the book proper starts, I just think, well, I know what happens because of the prologue. They didn't state it explicitly. It's not like they said George killed Brian in the prologue. It was not that. But you have to, if you're going to use a prologue, it can be a wonderful thing, and it can draw somebody in, especially if it's a sort of intriguing. A good way to start a book is to have the reader asking questions, and a prologue can do that brilliantly. What did that mean? What was that? What just happened? It's okay, because I'll read the book and I'll find out. But what you do is give it all away in the prologue. And like I said, not in a very explicit way. Just got to be very careful, because however subtle you think you're being, you might actually be dropping humongous clues. So you've got to watch that carefully.
That's great, Sal. That's really interesting. So asking questions and the power of using a prologue. Thanks. So we've had just a question, just going back to the point of talking about beta readers. How do you find one? And I think we've touched on this before. Certainly we have, if you're on Facebook, ProWritingAid, we have a community Facebook group. And in fact, I can't remember which day of the week, but one of the days of the week is dedicated to finding beta readers. And we invite anybody to just post there if you're looking for someone, or if you're offering your services. That's certainly one way. Any other suggestions, Sal?
Well, I've got two things to say. Everyone needs a reader. That's really important. 2 or 3 if you can. The thing is about beta readers is they're going to be like everyone else. They're like plumbers. You know, some plumbers are going to be fantastic. They'll come in, they'll fix your dripping tap. They won't leave a mess, and they'll charge you reasonably. And others are going to, be coming back for 3 weeks. Just because somebody sets themselves up as a beta reader does not mean they're going to be any good at it. It's going to mean they're going to be keen, they're going to want to help you, but they might have read 100 books on writing, and they might just be vomiting them back at you. It takes skill to be a good beta reader. So it is just as you would ask around for a good plumber, ask around for a good beta reader. Take recommendations. And if you're not easy, we'll come back to that chiming glass again. If you're not easy with what they're telling you, never change anything. I tell my clients this. Whatever I tell you, if I'm begging you, if I'm pleading with you to do something, and you're not getting that chime, if it doesn't sit right with you, do not do it. This is your book. So if your beta reader tells you to kill off Brian in the 2nd chapter, and you're thinking, I really don't want to do that, do not do it. And remember that they're not always going to be any good. I don't want to rubbish beta readers. It's a fantastic service they do for people, and most of them are very, very good at what they do. But it's a skill, and you need to be able to do it well. Yeah. So around, get good recommendations. If you're not happy, don't feel bad about saying to them, I'm so sorry. It's a very intimate relationship.
Of course.
It's like a therapist or a lover almost. So you mustn't be scared to be able to say to them, I'm sorry, I'm breaking up with you. It's not you, it's me. But you mustn't stick with somebody who you don't feel is really doing you the best service that they can. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sal. We're coming towards the end. Just if there are any other questions out there with our listeners today, please do post them. You can always contact us at ProWritingAid through our help and support channels, or Sally directly through her website afterwards if you've got questions.
I do a thing on my website where you can, it's a service, but we can have a phone call or a Zoom call, for an hour, and that can often be very helpful. So, it's not you have to launch in and have me take your book apart with tweezers. Just a phone call can sometimes be really helpful.
Great. Thanks, Sal. So one more question. With a couple more coming through now, but so someone has asked, going back to the passive voice point, saying it's hard to avoid with a historical non-fiction biography.
It shouldn't be. Maybe. That sounds very harsh for me. And I get the point. I really do get the point. It's a habit you have to unlearn. And that sounds so harsh, and I'm so sorry. I don't know you, and I don't know your writing. So I'm not meaning to be personal. Writing in the passive voice, and it's true, certain genres, really one seems to just fall into it, but it's not good. it's not good to stick with it. So you practice. But writing is a skill, and you have to keep learning always. Even my most famous authors are still always learning, still always honing their writing skills. And learning not to write with the passive voice all the time is a skill that you have to learn. And it's a really hard thing to do sometimes, but it pays off in spades. If you do it, if you do master it, you'll instantly see the difference. And there's 100 guides online. ProWritingAid helps. Even if you take one page of your book and try and write in the active voice, you will be amazed at the difference it makes, I promise you. And please, I must stress again, I don't mean to be rude about your writing. I've never seen your writing, but it's never good. Even if it's easier, it's going to affect the quality of the writing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sal. Last question from Amelia. She's just said, what's your feeling on using present tense versus past tense throughout a novel?
My feeling is make it as easy for yourself as possible.
Yeah.
There are certain tenses that are just nightmare for you as an author to use. You tie yourself up in knots. I mean, we all know the various things. So I always say stick really with the third person for your first book. It's so much easier. If you write in the first person, and I know you're talking about tenses, sorry, but if you write in the first person, it's so limited because you can only see things through the character. You can do it when you've learnt your craft a bit. And past and present tense, well, first of all, obviously you can skip between them. That's easy to do. And the other thing is that it's just what suits your story. And there's no, as long as it's done well, it doesn't matter which one you do.
Well, that's answered two questions, Sal, because Roger had also asked whether to write in the first or third person is easier while you were answering that question. So we've kind of got both there. Thank you.
Again, it comes back to genre. If you're writing hard-boiled sort of gumshoe fiction, it's nearly always in the past tense, isn't it? It was a hot July day and this broad walked into the office. I knew at once that she was trouble. That's all. That's genre fiction will sometimes lend itself to the past.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes what your reader expects. But just make life easy for yourself, really. That's the best thing to do. Don't try and too many bells and whistles. It's going to be a nightmare for you, and it's going to be hard for the reader as well.
Sal, that's brilliant. Really good. I think we've covered certainly a lot on pacing and structure, but I feel like we've covered a lot on other areas too. And as we often see, these sessions tend to like a giant Venn diagram, aren't they? They all kind of overlap. So I think we'll draw it to a close there. I just want to say, I know on behalf of you as well, how much we enjoy giving these presentations, running this webinar for you, the audience. It's great to see, great to have the interaction. We really enjoy getting the questions. We hope you don't mind that they sometimes, weave a little bit all over the place. But thank you ever so much for your time joining Sally and myself tonight. And we both look forward to seeing you in a month's time.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you all so much, everyone. It's brilliant. It's great talking with you. See you in a month.